A new federal political party launched onto the scene today, over a year away from the next federal election and just over 1 month away from 2 by-elections. The Conservatives continue to maintain a double-digit lead over the governing Liberals, based on an average of the polls. The Canadian Future Party is pitching itself as a centrist alternative. The interim party leader says they are looking to fill a gap Canadians are looking for.
Do you agree there is a vacuum to fill by former NDP, Liberals, Conservatives and Greens?
And tone of moderation and keen judgment and civility. And when I speak with Canadians, they say they'd like to see more of that. So we do think that we are helping to fill a vacuum that exists.
Dominic Cardy is
Do you
the
support a
interim
new
leader of
party
the
led
Canadian
by
Future
former
Party
NDP and former
joins
Conservative Cardy?
Thanks so much for having me on. Really appreciate it.
So give me the elevator pitch. What's the Canadian Future Party all about, and why are you launching this now?
We want Canada to go not left, not right, but forward. We think it's time for a politics that's focused on being brave, being evidence-based, and delivering results. Because if democracy doesn't deliver, then people are going to lose faith in it. We're seeing that right now with the Liberals, who are trapped in the politics of the 1990s, and Mr. Poilievre, who perhaps is trapped in the politics of the 1930s. We want to talk about Canada moving ahead with clear, decisive plans for dealing with some of the big challenges that bluntly Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Trudeau are simply not being honest with Canadians about: national defense, immigration, housing, and so on.
Yeah, I want to get to Mr. Poilievre in a sec. Let's give you a chance to kind of spell out what you're all about. As you know, with the established party brands, people kind of have a vague idea of what they're going to get, right? With the Liberals, you're going to get socially progressive, a bigger government. The Conservatives, kind of anti-tax, tough on crime, smaller government. The Green Party, obviously quite self-explanatory. What are some of the key foundational principles of the Canadian Future Party? What is your brand?
So we line up with the 70% or so of Canadians who say they see themselves in the middle and have concerns about the slide of the Liberal and Conservative parties towards the extremes. So we're a party that is liberal on social questions and responsible when it comes to fiscal issues. Because if we don't have a government that delivers results, which means it has to be well run, people lose faith in it. And when people lose faith in their government, they look for alternatives. And I think one of the best ways to sum it up is, let's look at the immigration crisis. Mr. Trudeau's team created a political crisis by seizing political control of the temporary foreign workers and student visa programs. The other parts of the immigration system continue to work just fine. The crisis has come because the Liberals ignored the gatekeepers. So when Mr. Poilievre talks about getting rid of gatekeepers, we're talking about duplicating, triplicating, quadruplicating the sort of crisis we've seen in immigration. So we believe in expertise, but we believe that the experts have to show again that they can deliver. And we haven't done a good job in the political elite of doing that over the last number of years. So if we can't get back to a government that actually shows results for Canadian citizens, we're going to see that slide towards populism, which is exactly what Mr. Poilievre is taking advantage of. But at the same time, there's a lot of people who don't feel comfortable with his slide towards extremism and want to see a change from Mr. Trudeau. And we're there to offer a sensible, evidence-based solutions, set of solutions that we hope will attract attention from Canadians, and we'll get to work on pushing that starting today.
So you're a former provincial Progressive Conservative. The party's interim president, Tara McPhail, says she's a former Conservative as well. You mentioned Poilievre, so is this movement that you're creating, that you're launching today, is it a direct backlash against kind of the right-wing, more populist style that Pierre Poilievre has adopted? You said it's from the 1930s. Maybe elaborate on that and maybe speak to what his role was really in the formation of this party.
It's not just Mr. Poilievre, and it's not just the Conservative Party. It's our politics writ large. The Liberal Party is falling into the same trap of falling into social media-driven, algorithm-driven extremism, appealing to people who are further and further away from the mainstream, further and further away from offering concrete solutions to real problems. So I don't want to hear any more apologies for things that Canada has done wrong in the past. I want to see solutions to what's wrong with Canada now. Mr. Poilievre spends his time talking about Canada being broken. Canada is a fantastic country. We're not broken. There's no end to what we can do. But we have people who've come to join the new party who are former members of Stephen Harper's cabinet, former members of Jack Layton's team, elected folks who are sitting in the House of Commons, former Liberal organizers, Greens, New Democrats, people from across the political spectrum who are all united in going, there's something seriously wrong with our politics. That this approach of just using social media and leaders' offices to run political parties, divorced from MPs being given any real power to express their opinions and vote the way they feel they should in the House of Commons, this is a problem that all the parties share. And it's one where, to use that example, we're proposing a concrete change. Canada copied the British parliamentary system when we built this country. One thing we didn't copy was the caucus system that allows backbench MPs in the UK to vote against their leaders if the leader's office can't convince them to support them. In Canada, we treat our MPs like sheep. They just vote yay, 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 nay, 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 depending on what the leader says. There's no reason we can't change that. That takes will from political party leaders, and that's what we're here to say we're going to do. And I have a record on this that 2018 to 20 in New Brunswick, when I was a cabinet minister, I helped write the platform in 2018. We ran the government that way. Through the early stage of COVID, creating an all-party committee, like a war cabinet, to help manage the province during that crisis. That's exactly the sort of creative approach we want to see brought to other crises facing Canada.
We asked Poilievre's spokesperson about your party, and this is what he told us. He said, quote, "We are not paying much attention to what the former NDP leader says, and neither are Canadians." So obviously he's referencing your past as NDP in New Brunswick. You were the leader of that party provincially. What do you say to them? It seems like they're quite dismissive of you and your effort.
What we have seen, which you've probably noticed over the last couple of weeks, Mr. Poilievre claiming that his party is the centrist party. Tory influencers online trying to pass that same message. They see the same polls we do. They know that there's a lot of Canadians, a majority of Canadians, who want to see a change, who are tired of Mr. Trudeau's over-promising and under-delivering. But at the same time are really concerned about Mr. Poilievre's drift towards populist extremism. So we're here to offer an alternative to that. And so, of course, they're going to say insulting things. You know, one of the other things we're not going to do, get into that sort of gutter politics. Like we want to focus on what we're going to do differently. Sure, we'll be sharp when we have to be, but things like that are exactly why we need a change.
You say populist extremism, but it seems to have an appeal, right? I mean, he's leading over the Liberals by 20 points in the polls. He's at 43 points, if we're to believe the aggregators. That's a huge lead. He's poised to form a massive majority government if an election were held today. So that seems to have a lot of appeal among people, right? I mean, you might quibble with his tone and tenor, but it's certainly resonating.
Well, first, I wouldn't quibble with it. I'd say it's extremely dangerous. And one of the things I think we've got to listen to is the voices around the world who've had their experiences with radical populist governments on the left and the right in recent years, is how dangerous they are, how they don't make life better for people. So putting that aside, absolutely he's doing well, because right now his party is the only one that's seen as an alternative to Mr. Trudeau. The NDP have hooked themselves possibly permanently to the Liberals. Certainly for the next election, they're going to be judged on the same criteria that Mr. Trudeau's team will be. The Greens, I think, have broadly succeeded to convince Canadians that climate change is real. Certainly that's not something we're going to waste time on in the Canadian Future Party. We believe climate change is real. And then you've got Mr. Bernier's party, who are just grumpy that they've been out right-wing extremists by Mr. Poilievre's team.
You mentioned the Green Party. As you know, in our first past the post system, it's really tough for smaller parties to actually win a seat. It took the Green Party 30 years from their foundation to when they actually won a seat with Elizabeth May. What makes the Canadian Future Party different? How can you actually win a seat in a system that really does not advantage upstart parties like yours?
First, that's absolutely the case. We recognize the challenge we're facing, and we're only embarking on this project. The people around me, who again come from all parties and none, who recognize the crisis Canada is facing. The reason why we're doing this is because we want to offer Canadians that alternative. And Canadians have a choice going into the next election about whether they like that or not. Our job is to present a positive, well thought out platform and a team of candidates who could manage Canada.
You mentioned candidates. You've named at least one for the upcoming federal by-election in Quebec in La Salle-Mard. You will name one in Manitoba as well. What does success look like? What are you expecting to see in those by-elections?
In those by-elections, we want to get our name out there and start to share our vision for Canadian politics. Longer term, our goal is to try and win as many seats as possible. I've never understood some folks in politics is how we're just here to try and influence the other guys. In my time in the NDP, that was often a problem. So we want to try and win, but what we really want to try and do is change Canadian politics. I don't care about party labels. If the Liberals or Tories take all of our platform ideas and start recruiting people who believe in those same sort of mainstream moderate values that most Canadians share, all power to them. If they don't, we're going to be there with a team, as new and fresh a party as we might be, to offer them that alternative, and we'll see whether or not that catches fire. That's up to Canadians to decide. That's democracy.
All right, let's leave it there. Dominic Cardy is the interim leader of the Canadian Future Party. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having me on the show. Really appreciate it, JP.